Hey everyone, welcome to another Keyfactor Tech Talk. Thanks for joining us this morning, afternoon, or evening, depending where you are. Today we're going to be talking about the 5 reasons to modernize your PKI. I'll be joined by the one and only Harry Haramis, the SVP of Cloud and SaaS Marketplace here at Keyfactor. Hey Harry, thank you for joining us.
Hi everyone, thanks for having me.
Of course. So before we get started and dive in, I just want to cover a few housekeeping items. Questions, feel free to ask anytime in the chat box. We'll try to get to them as we go in a more conversational format, or if not, we'll keep them. If we don't get to them right away, we'll keep them to the end and answer all the questions at once. Resources. We have a ton of great resources on our website. If you go to keyfactor.com and go to the resource section, you'll find an abundance of really cool stuff. But we also added a couple of ebooks right here on Bright Talk that you can access. So make sure to check those out when you can. And lastly, just double check your video settings. Bright Talk has a tendency to drop the quality down by default. So just click the gear icon in the bottom right and select the highest quality available. So here's what we'll cover today. Why we're here, how legacy PKI is playing out in a modern world right now and the 5 reasons to modernize it. We'll talk about the industry-wide challenges we have seen and the solution we at Keyfactor have. And to cap it off at the end, we'll dive into questions and go into some polling and some resources. Harry, do you want to walk through our solution stack here and kind of where our discussion today relates to?
Yeah, happy to. So really, there are a couple of pillars in the stack that you need to be concerned with when you want to get control over your certificate infrastructure, your PKI infrastructure in your organization. Starting at the top, issuing. So the actual PKI issuance, the actual validation of certificates is kind of step number 1. It's critical. It is where it all starts. And that is where we're going to focus this discussion today. But in addition to issuing certificates, you also need to look at the other pillars. So you need to automate the installation of those certificates. So once they've been issued, they still need to be implemented on the endpoints, the servers, the applications, the devices that you might have. And so, that's kind of step 2 is to automate the provisioning of those certificates and to automate the lifecycle management of the certificate. So once you put a certificate on, it's got some lifespan, and you need to make sure that you're always, on top of and automatically renewing that certificate and making sure that it's constantly valid. And finally, some of the other components that are buried underneath really are around signing. So, we see, and we'll talk about this a little bit more, but there's, a lot around signing the software. So there's either, applications on workstations, there there's server code that needs to be signed, but really this comes into play on product security, right? So if you have products that you are shipping to your customers, and those products have firmware, have software on them, have connectivity back to your infrastructure. Typically, certificates are a way to make sure that those devices can communicate and be authenticated correctly. Managed as identities, and all the communication is encrypted, and you're able to get all of that telemetry information from a device that you really expect to be talking to. So these are really the pillars. We have solutions in all of these areas, but again, today we're going to focus on the issuing layer. go ahead and proceed. So this is, I would say, the meat of kicking off the discussion here. So today where we are is we have, sometimes decades old infrastructure. So many or thousands of organizations out there have on-prem infrastructure. They have, things like, massive Active Directory footprints, many different PKI solutions that issue certificates to either your end users, your internal applications. It could be to your contractors. It could be to devices internally, whether they're workstations, whether they're servers, whether they're sensors in the factory. Any device on the network has been getting certificates for quite a number of years now. And what we see clearly is a shift to leveraging cloud to some extent. And you'll, depending on the organization, they're either, in some transition where they're transitioning the applications or the infrastructure that makes sense to move to the cloud. They've either done that or they're in the process of doing that. Some organizations are targeting, to move everything into the cloud. Other organizations will always have a hybrid footprint and have some of their applications and infrastructure always on-prem and some in the cloud. And so really what that means is that, I talk to so many customers that say, we've moved certain components of our infrastructure, like our SAP system or something like that, into a SaaS solution. So it's now cloud-based. It's no longer on-prem. But we are issuing certificates to all of our devices and endpoints and users from our on-prem PKI for those cloud-based resources. That is probably not the most optimum approach. The optimum approach is the applications and resources that remain on-prem should go ahead and get their certificates issued from on-prem PKI. The applications that have moved to cloud and the endpoints and the users of those applications should all be getting their certificates from cloud-based PKI. So really, you need a solution that allows you to pivot and issue certificates, from the right place. I'm going to just launch a poll, a simple yes or no question, and I'm going to ask if your organization has a move to cloud initiative. Do you feel that certificates and PKI, that component of it, is under control? We'll give people some time to respond to that.
Cool.
And so what we want to do is cover some of the details around, how you can have a system that takes into consideration this cloud movement, allows you to apply the best practice, around implementing PKI in a way that you can issue certificates to, either on-prem or legacy, or kind of your modern cloud SaaS type of use cases, and have those coexist and, maintain complete control over this.
Cool, Harry. Thank you. And to kind of add on to that ties in perfectly, we can dive right into, the 5 reasons to modernize your PKI, which is obviously the reason we're here today. There are 5 reasons, but also kind of 5 challenges and pain points we see that lead people to pursue the need for a modern PKI. To start is new use cases. Legacy PKI solutions just simply cannot support the velocity and scale of new use cases like IoT devices and DevOps workloads, which we're going to touch on here in a second. Second is certificate sprawl. So the amount of certificates within a company is growing like crazy. Organizations are now issuing a lot more certificates year over year. Different teams are spinning up their own self-signed certs and or CAs, which creates this sprawl that becomes really hard to manage and get control of. The lack of PKI expertise is a common pain that we hear really often. Having PKI experts on staff is just not that common, and we totally get it, and we see that becoming more and more of an issue. Scalability. So with older PKIs, it's difficult and costly to scale or support new use cases. And one of the most important reasons to modernize is to eliminate certificate-based outages. That's kind of our bread and butter at Keyfactor. It's something that we talk about on a daily basis. And this is one of the problems that we solve really, really well. Harry, do you want to touch on the IoT and DevOps use cases?
Yeah, of course. So, these are common use cases that we see needing certificates, needing PKI. And, of course, I spoke about cloud. Cloud is still going to be a main driver for re-architecting your solution. You're re-architecting your whole infrastructure. We know that PKI and certificates is a small piece. When I'm a CIO at a large organization, there's a ton on my plate in terms of looking at how we can expand and take advantage of cloud and reduce costs and move some of my infrastructure there, while maintaining security, while maintaining availability and everything else that I need to worry about, right? But certificates and PKI are definitely critical and something that, if I'm a CIO, I expect my security office to have covered. Again, cloud, is always going to be a big driver. We see new use cases coming up, though, and these, are new from a couple of years now, but they're really picking up a lot of steam. So DevOps use cases, you see, as customers are modernizing their infrastructure, they're also looking at things like containers and Kubernetes. They're not looking at big VM infrastructures and individual servers and all of that. They're looking at how to automate things, how to take advantage of microservices, and all of those things really drive the need for certificates. So you'll see containers that are spawned with very short lifetimes. They get a certificate. That certificate could be valid for a week, and then the server goes away once that requirement, that peak usage requirement goes away. That server is deprovisioned. That certificate needs to be revoked, or at least it needs to expire on its own in a short time span. So that really drives up the scale need for certificates. It really drives the issuance layer really needs to be ready to handle these types of use cases. And what's from my perspective the most fun use case from our from a certificate and PKI perspective is IoT. So when customers are now looking at how they secure the products that they create and the products that are generating revenue for their business, I could be a medical device manufacturer, and I'm making an insulin infusion pump, or an ICU crash cart, those types of things. Or I'm an auto manufacturer, and I have cars on the road with a lot of software on them. I typically always come to the conclusion that I need certificates and I need PKI to, again, sign all the code that's running on all these, But to make sure that these devices are uniquely identified and that they get an identity, and that these devices are able to communicate back securely, in an encrypted fashion, and if the device is somehow compromised, it can be cut off from the collective. And so these IoT use cases are where I have the most fun talking to our customers. In addition to that, there's always other use cases that exist for PKI. Things like your mobile workforce, so VPNs, Wi-Fi, all of those types of things. The whole working from home movement that we've seen over the last couple of years. These, are not kind of surging use cases. I would say that we tackled those over the last couple of years quite a bit. So I don't know that there's a ton of growth in those use cases, but they'll still always be there and important. And then finally, compliance typically always drives something. So audit findings, remediation for findings and things like that to make sure that a company maintains its compliance is always typically some driver for improving your security. I'm going to launch one more poll around this and see.
Actually, it's
what everybody
right
else.
I launched it while you were talking.
Oh, you did?
I did. Yep.
Perfect.
So I'll let that just run for a few more seconds while we move on to the next slide here. Certificate sprawl. That's another reason to modernize. It's another pain point that we hear often, another challenge that organizations are having. And it's without a doubt that PKI deployments are getting more and more complex. The volume of certificates is growing exponentially. What that means, more teams and more use cases that need certificates. And that's a good thing, but that means less visibility into the environment. And with more certificates being issued, we are seeing that organizations are experiencing more problems there. There's more complexity within PKI, which obviously equals, or within organizations, that equals more tools. So you'll see that more teams are doing things their own way. One team could be, using self-signed certificates, another maybe using a public CA, and that really leads to less control and less governance. And to add to all that, certificates now have a shorter lifespan. So to add to all of the additional factors, we now have to stay on top of them more often. So the frequency in which they need to be managed is also increasing and providing more headache there. Harry, we saw a lot of findings in our 2023 machine identity report here. Do you want to touch on that?
Yeah. So, this really comes down to the way things, organically grow over time. So what we typically see our customers, finding themselves in a situation where they have looked at point solutions. And so, they might have started with a, very, I would say, organized and robust solution. So, again, starts kind of with, you have to give a ton of credit to Microsoft. They have done a ton with, from a security perspective, around certificates and PKI and so forth. If you look at the backbone of Active Directory and Microsoft Active Directory Certificate Services, or CA or MSAE, or whatever you might know it as, that has been issuing certificates to organizations for decades now. And it made a lot of sense when that was really your primary use case. But, again, what we see is then the company goes to adopt some cloud services like AWS or Azure, or they, are looking for Linux, friendly type of use cases, or IoT use cases, or non Microsoft use cases. What they, they've been faced with choices to make. Either they try to leverage their very Microsoft specific PKI, or they might spawn another solution for that, another point solution. So maybe they, dipped into AWS. They started using some AWS certificate services for just that, just their AWS stuff. And now they just gave birth to a second PKI solution. Then they probably have some public certificates that they need to manage for their internet-facing web infrastructure. So now they've brought in a public CA, and then maybe their Linux group brought up some very Linux specific PKI. It could be our eGPCA. It could be some other solution. So now large organizations end up with, on average, 9 different PKI infrastructures that they need to somehow manage. And when it's that messy, it's very hard to have full control over it. I will say that that has been Keyfactor's business for quite some time, is helping a customer have control over these, all of these different disparate kind of PKI systems. If you use a certificate lifecycle management solution like our Command, that's what it does. It lets you integrate into all of these different PKI systems and still maintain control over it. But what we see now is that customers want to take this opportunity where they're having to re-architect their infrastructure anyway for kind of the new era where maybe their stuff's moving to cloud or mostly in cloud. They want to take the opportunity to consolidate things, and so our issuing solution called the eGPCA is a great way to have one PKI system that can turn back around and issue certificates to all of these different environments, whether you're in AWS, whether you're still have on-prem Active Directory, whether you're now using Intune in Azure Active Directory, for example, whether you've got IoT devices, things like that. So again, really, if you find yourself in a situation where you're issuing tons of certificates internally and externally, you've got disparate, different PKI solutions that are point solutions to handle those different use cases, you really should be looking at a way to modernize that infrastructure and lay down one system that can handle all of these different use cases. And I'll talk about that a little bit more in the following slides.
Awesome. Every year we release a State of Machine Identity report. If you're not familiar with that, it's under the Resources tab on Keyfactor.com. We run this really, really robust and intense report on the industry and some of the important findings that we discover. This year's findings regarding PKI expertise were pretty eye-opening, and I'm sure anyone on this call today has either directly or indirectly experienced kind of what we're going to talk about here. And we asked the organizations if they feel that they have enough resources and staff to deploy and maintain PKI effectively. And as you can see here, more than half of them said no. And when we asked them who is currently responsible for deploying and managing PKI at their company, the answers were varied and had a few different results. There was IT, security, infrastructure, and what was kind of eye-opening was that 17% said that they had no clear owner. And this is across different industries, different verticals. So it wasn't really just a niche issue, but kind of an issue throughout organizations out there. On to outages. Harry, I think you were going to touch on this here.
Yeah, I want to just launch one more poll. So really, this comes down to, this kind of ties a lot of what we said together. And if you have a lot of disparate point solutions, and you're managing multiple different PKIs, and you might not have the expertise in-house to be experts at all of those things. The question really is, how do you prevent downtime? How we have some customers that have dozens, or in some cases hundreds, of Microsoft CA servers alone that have basically been brought up over the years, and it's difficult to manage all of these, right? They, at some point they might have been well staffed, and now they find themselves having dozens or hundreds of servers that they need to manage. And certificates might have been issued with a 3-year lifespan. All of a sudden they wake up on one morning, and that certificate's been has expired, some applications down, and these types, and it's playing a game of whack-a-mole, is what's happening. So there's a couple of things that you can do to really put yourself in a better situation. Mm-hmm. Number one, you can again consolidate that system, or those dozens or hundreds of servers, into a more of a collapsed infrastructure that's able to scale. And that collapsed infrastructure could still exist on-prem if that's a requirement. So again, take one cluster of our solution that replaces dozens or hundreds of disparate servers that still turn around and handle all of your use cases, or or consume this solution as a SaaS, or somewhere else that you can get this service provided back to you without having to have all the expertise, and without having to worry about being notified about certificates being expiring and causing outages and things of that nature. So really the goal is to consider all of the options that you have today that really weren't available years ago. And we would like to say that our solutions are, a great, should make a short list that you should be considering.
Definitely. Ties in actually right into what the solution is. So how does Keyfactor solve this? With EJBCA, you can support any use case. Literally any use case out there. You can secure new applications, workforces, devices, infrastructure, and that reduces complexity. You maximize your resources. So with multiple deployment models, like Harry was just saying, you can deploy PKI fast and easily, either as a service or fully managed. And something we hear often, especially as I'm talking to prospects and customers, is PKI was not something I signed up for. If the PKI and managing our search just fell into my lap. So freeing up those resources, and with one of the deployment models that's best fitted for your organization. And then overall, you simplify your PKI. We say that PKI is robust, but it doesn't have to be complex. It's critical, but it doesn't have to be complex. You can use discovery tools to find certificates across CAs, networks, devices, gain that full visibility and control of your environment. Using EJBCA, again, with any of those deployment models. We're going to touch on that here in a second. I'll let Harry, our resident expert, kind of dive in a little deeper on what those features are in EJBCA.
Yeah, so my background is probably about 30 years in internet infrastructures, internet security specifically. And over those years, I would say the first 20 or so were probably revolved around Microsoft CA, right? I mean, that was the way to handle PKI. Of course, I had a ton of experience with public CAs. I had a ton of experience with some other solutions like Entrust and other things. But when I found eGPCA, a dozen years ago or so, it was like a light bulb went off. Like this is the way that it should be done. And I want to walk through, some of the key features that really makes this solution, the solution that you should be considering for the issuing layer of your PKI infrastructure. So when you look at eGPCA, it is, not only a simple CA, right? It is a full PKI solution. So it has all of the validation you need. So we're not, doing simple CRL stuff anymore. Although there are of course use cases for that where that makes sense, but typically we see customers moving towards OCSP for their validation. And that becomes critical because when there's an OCSP outage, that's when applications go down. So, you might be in a situation where if you can't issue certificates, fine, you just can't onboard new devices or users for that period of time, right? But if the application is doing an OCSP check as connections are coming into that application, and the PKI is down for that, or can't keep up with the load or whatever, that's when applications appear to be down. That's equivalent to a certificate expiring, that type of thing. So eGPCA handles that extremely well and scales extremely well. And then of course the RA functionality, again, that's kind of where you are taking your requests for new certificates or renewals, things like that. And the beauty of eGPCA is that you can have a ton of logical separation. So you could set up one cluster, a high availability cluster of 2 or 3 nodes somewhere, either on-prem in your infrastructure, in your Kubernetes environment, in the cloud, or as a SaaS from us. You stand that up once, and at that point, you can logically create as many new CAs and even separate PKI hierarchies as you want without any more physical, or provisioning that has to be done, if you will, of service. So it's very flexible. It allows you as a business to respond to your customers. So if I'm a large organization, I am a shared service, and I'm providing PKI back to my various business units within the organization. I want to respond as quickly as possible. A business unit internally can come to me and say, hey, within a month, I need a new application to get certificates, and it needs to, be issuing millions of certificates a month or whatever it is. In the past, that required a ton of provisioning to be done to be able to address that new business unit's request. Now, it's a simple, API call to our system to provision those CAs. Extremely powerful. And this, again, could be living in the cloud, it could be living on-prem, it could be living in both at the same time. And so you have all of that flexibility. And of course, we support all of the protocols and algorithms. Even we're the first to support post-quantum now in, I would say, a proof of concept scenario, because I think the quantum crypto algorithms are still not completely ratified yet, but I am not the expert in that area. But we, support all of the things like SCEP and EST and CMP and REST APIs and everything that you'd need to support all the use cases that you could ever try to throw at this. Of course, we are common criteria certified, probably the best level of certification that you can ask for from a PKI system. And we're also in high security. We're on a list of approved high security applications called the CSFC for the federal government. So if the federal government trusts us, that's we're pretty proud of that. Yeah, I mean, again, I just want to reiterate that this is set up once, highly scalable, and would carry you into the future for many years after an initial appropriate deployment. Let's go on to the next slide.
Speaking of deployments.
Yeah, and so I touched on this, and I think this is the last slide, and we'll probably go into questions. But very specifically, the way that we offer our eGBCA solution is any way that you would possibly need to have it. So we have on-prem software versions of our solution. So you can get this as an OVA or as a container and implement this in your VM infrastructure, on bare metal, if that's still a requirement for you in high security areas. It is. That's great. You can do that. Or in your Kubernetes infrastructure, for example. We provide a PKI in a box as a hardware appliance. All of these delivery forms are just methods to consume our eGBCA software. So no matter how you take it here, you get all the functionality. Then we, in our AWS and Azure and GCP cloud environments, we offer eGBCA as cloud infrastructure. So pay as you go. You can install it in your tenant and run your PKI under your control, but subscribe to our software to be able to do that. And then the last couple here on the right, we can host and manage this for you. So the difference between SaaS and managed really is SaaS. We provide eGBCA as a service, so we guarantee the availability and provide you an SLA for the uptime of eGBCA itself, but the administrator has full access to from the customer to log into eGBCA and do all of the configuration that they want, through APIs or through the GUI. So your hands aren't tied, but you also aren't responsible for making sure that the infrastructure stays up and running. We are. And then on the very far right, it's a complete white glove service. So if you, as a customer, you really don't want to have any PKI expertise in-house, you can consume us as a PKI as a service, and we handle all of the PKI, including the offline routes and everything else that's required. And we completely configure and maintain the PKI infrastructure without the customer ever having to log in, and only just consume certificates. So really, it's hard to imagine that you would need a PKI solution and delivery form any other way that's not covered by Keyfactor today.
Awesome. Well, that wraps it up. We do have a couple questions here we'll dive into. Thank you, Harry, for diving into all this and shedding some light on this. I'm going to run through some of these questions here. All right, first one up. If I'm running an Active Directory environment today, what are the options when I move to Azure Active Directory for PKI?
Yeah, so I think this is a very typical scenario that I see many customers, trying to find the answer to. Mm-hmm. And where it sits today is most customers, again, have these large Active Directory infrastructures. They have Microsoft certificate services running, and it's all integrated and tied in very well. And certificates get issued, just automatically, dynamically to all of their clients, whether they be, Windows workstations or, sometimes they're extended to, other operating systems or to mobile devices, things like that. That's all kind of automatic. But if they and customers can then use things like group policy and other tools to manage all of their resources centrally, because all of these certificates are provisioned correctly to the devices. But what do you do now when you move from Active Directory to Azure Active Directory? So the typical scenario that I see is that a customer will use something like Microsoft Intune or other MDM solutions. It could be Mobile Iron or AirWatch or JamF or some of these other solutions, but they are now managing the endpoints through these MDM solutions. Again, Intune being one of the most popular that I see. They provision the certificates to the devices through Intune, and the PKI that all of these endpoints are pointing to is something else now. It's not, they're on-prem MSCA servers. It's typically going to be something else. And what we clearly see when we're talking to our customers is moving that to our EGBCA solution. So customers are bringing up Intune, pointing it to EGBCA, whether it's in cloud hosted by us or whether it's on-prem or even in their own clouds, using EGBCA to issue all their certificates to their end users. So that's really the replacement and the common way that I see customers going these days.
Awesome. Another one here. Thanks, guys. When I issue certificates to my products or my servers, should I use public certificates or from my own PKI?
Yeah, that's a tough question. I think it depends on this scenario. So if I am a company that creates a product, I manufacture a product, and that product has software and firmware on it, and I can completely control the upgrade process of that device. So again, I'm a medical device manufacturer, and I sell infusion pumps to hospitals, or if I am an auto manufacturer and I sell cars, right? I have control over this device, and I'm able to update the software on it. I'm able to manage that device and the whole life cycle of that device. At that point, I don't want to use public trust. I want to have my own private PKI, and I want that device to only trust one certificate, right? And that's just in one root CA, I would say, and that's the one that I created for myself and my own organization. But if you don't have control over the device, where the device is something that is internet facing, and it requires the audience to be the internet, right? The audience could be anybody with a web browser that's logging in. So I'm a SaaS application, things like that. It's probably going to be a combination of the two things, but I definitely need to use public trust for that service or for that product, because the browsers that are talking to me, my end users are, they trust the well-known Mozilla public trust root chain. So those are really the two scenarios. I would say there's not really one right answer there, but you need to look at when to use one or the other, and definitely use private when you can, because you have a whole lot more control over it, and it's a lot more, I would say, cost effective to issue private certificates.
Cool. Just for the sake of time, I know we're about to hit time here. I'll pick one last question. Somebody asked, do I as an admin have access with the SaaS option? So with the SaaS deployment option, is there admin access?
Yeah, let me go back to a slide. So if you choose EGBCA SaaS, I don't know if people can see my mouse move, but if you choose the second to the right box, EGBCA SaaS, you have full admin access. There's no restrictions in terms of our customers being able to access EGBCA SaaS and make changes. If you are using the far right solution, which is the full-blown managed PKI, at that point, you've made a decision that you do not want access to your own HVAC admin console, and you want that to be a full white glove service provided by Keyfactor. So again, it depends on where the customer is, where they, do they want this type of access or not, and we can provide it either way.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, we're actually just about a minute over time, so thank you all for joining. Thank you, Harry. We appreciate it. So yeah, make sure to check out the resources attached on Bright Talk and also the resources on keyfactor.com. And we look forward to seeing you on the next Tech Talk.
Thanks, everybody.
See you. Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye.